It all began with the sound of children's laughter echoing through a quiet suburban neighborhood. For years, the large oak tree in the center of the Johnson family's backyard had been more than just a piece of greenery. It had been a sanctuary, a fortress of imagination, a childhood playground that turned ordinary afternoons into grand adventures. The treehouse built into its sturdy branches wasn't just nailed planks and rope ladders, it was a symbol of childhood freedom. The Johnson children had spent countless hours climbing into its little wooden structure, decorating it with string lights, hanging makeshift curtains, and proudly calling it their kingdom. Neighbors had often smiled watching the kids wave from above, their shouts and giggles a reminder of simpler times. Everyone seemed to enjoy it. Everyone, that is, except one person. Karen. She lived 2 houses down, with a yard perfectly manicured and a home painted in the HOA-approved shades of beige. To her, every rule was sacred scripture. She patrolled the neighborhood with a gaze sharp enough to pierce glass, scanning for violations like a hawk searching for prey. And the treehouse, to her, was nothing short of a crime. At first, Karen had simply glared at it whenever she walked her dog past the Johnson home. She muttered under her breath, shaking her head as though the sight of children playing was an unbearable offense. But muttering turned to documenting. Soon she was standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, snapping photos of the treehouse from every angle. The Johnson family didn't notice the storm brewing until the official letter arrived. The HOA, responding to Karen's repeated complaints, delivered a stern warning. According to the bylaws, no external structures were to be built higher than 8 feet, and the treehouse, though modest in design, stood taller than that. The family was given 30 days to remove it or face escalating fines. For the children, the letter felt like a death sentence. Their fortress was marked for demolition. Their laughter turned to tears, and their bright faces dimmed with the weight of loss. The father, David Johnson, tried to reason with the board. He explained that the treehouse had been standing for years without issue, that it was safe, and that it brought joy not just to his kids, but to their friends. But reason meant nothing against the relentless pressure of Karen. Karen doubled down. She called the HOA president at all hours, demanded immediate action, and claimed the treehouse was an eyesore that reduced neighborhood property values. Her complaints weren't just persistent, they were venomous. She framed the structure as a dangerous liability and insisted that it must be torn down before it caused an accident. Within weeks, the HOA gave its final ruling. The treehouse had to go. The day of demolition was heavy with silence. David and his children stood in the backyard, tools in hand, forced to dismantle the very place that had been the heart of their family's joy. The boards creaked as they were pried apart. The rope ladder fell limp against the tree, and one by one, the pieces of childhood were carried away. The children cried softly as the structure disappeared, leaving only an empty oak tree behind. From the sidewalk, Karen watched, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. To her, this was a victory, a triumph of rules over joy. But what she didn't realize was that this moment of destruction had planted a seed in David's mind, a seed that would grow into something she could never have anticipated. Because while Karen believed she had won, David wasn't the kind of man who surrendered easily. In fact, the demolition ignited something far stronger than anger. It sparked determination. He promised himself that his children wouldn't just get their treehouse back. They would get something bigger, something better, something so extravagant that even the HOA couldn't touch it. The empty branches of the oak tree seemed to whisper a challenge, and David was ready to answer it. By the end of that week, he was already sketching plans. His tools were neatly lined in the garage, lumber was ordered in bulk, and late at night, long after his children had gone to sleep, he studied building codes and legal loopholes. He realized something crucial. The HOA's rules were strict about freestanding external structures, but they said almost nothing about structures built directly into existing trees. Karen had unknowingly handed him the perfect loophole. What had been a simple wooden treehouse was about to be reborn into something extraordinary. David wasn't thinking small anymore. He was thinking big. Mansion big. The Johnson backyard, once the stage for laughter and loss, was about to become ground zero for the most audacious act of neighborhood defiance anyone had ever seen. And while the HOA thought they had closed the matter, they had no idea what was coming next. The oak tree stood like a silent guardian in the Johnson backyard, its thick branches stretching toward the sky as if waiting for what was to come. For weeks after the demolition, it loomed bare and lonely, a reminder of what had been lost. But behind the closed doors of the Johnson home, the father, David, had been working tirelessly. Sketches littered his desk, measuring tapes hung from his belt, and every evening he disappeared into the garage where tools hummed long into the night. This wasn't just a project. It was a mission. The first truckload of lumber arrived early on a Saturday morning. Stacks of heavy beams, plywood sheets, and boxes of nails were unloaded into the driveway. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed down, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Some assumed the J. Onsons were adding a deck or renovating their home. Few could have guessed the truth, that David was about to build what the neighborhood would soon whisper about for years to come. Construction began quietly. David, with sleeves rolled up and determination etched into his face, hoisted the first beams into the branches of the oak. With careful precision, he bolted supports directly into the trunk, anchoring them so securely that they looked like they had grown there. This was no ordinary treehouse. This was a foundation built to withstand storms. At first, the site was unassuming. A few beams, a platform taking shape. To the untrained eye, it looked like another treehouse. But anyone who looked closer could see the difference. The beams were thicker, the supports industrial grade, the design more ambitious than anything a casual backyard builder would attempt. By the second week, the platform spanned nearly the entire spread of the tree's branches, wide enough to host not just a playhouse, but a structure with multiple rooms. Neighbors leaned over fences to watch, whispering to one another about the scale. Children pressed their faces to windows, wide-eyed with anticipation. The Johnson kids, once heartbroken, now bounced with excitement as they watched their father's vision come alive. And then came Karen. Her sharp eyes spotted the construction almost immediately. From her morning walk, she froze in place at the sight of the massive beams rising into the oak. Her jaw tightened, her dog tugging impatiently at the leash while she stood rooted, glaring across the street. To her, it was déjà vu. Another treehouse, another violation, another fight. But this time, something about it unsettled her. The beams looked too solid, the structure too professional. It didn't look like a child's toy anymore. It looked like a statement. By the afternoon, Karen was already snapping photos. She lingered on the sidewalk, zooming in on every detail, documenting angles like an investigator building a case. But when she marched to the HOA president's house and demanded immediate action, she hit an unexpected wall. The HOA president, weary from months of her relentless complaints, reviewed the bylaws carefully. Yes, the rules prohibited external freestanding structures over 8 feet. Yes, the previous treehouse had been deemed a violation. But this? This wasn't freestanding. It was built directly into the existing branches of the tree. And nowhere, in any line of the bylaws, did it specifically forbid a structure supported entirely by a tree. It was, frustratingly, a loophole. Karen was livid. She stormed home, phone clutched tight in her hand, ranting to anyone who would listen. But no matter how much she complained, the HOA president reminded her that unless the structure posed a proven safety hazard, there was nothing they could do. At least, not yet. Meanwhile, David pressed forward. Week after week, the project expanded. Walls began to rise, framed with precision, wrapped in plywood. Openings for windows and doors appeared. A staircase, sturdier than any rope ladder, spiraled up the trunk, replacing the crude climb of the old treehouse. Soon, it wasn't just a platform. It was a house in the trees. By the third month, the scale of the build was undeniable. A balcony jutted from one side, overlooking the yard like a private terrace. A second level was framed, creating the beginnings of a loft. Solar panels glinted in the sunlight, powering a string of construction lamps that kept the work going late into the evening. Neighbors were divided. Some admired the ingenuity. Others worried about what it might mean for property values. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one had ever seen anything like it before. Karen, however, grew more obsessed by the day. She hovered constantly near the Johnson property, sometimes in her car, sometimes pacing the sidewalk, her phone always recording. She called city inspectors, zoning off, ICEs, even fire marshals, anyone who might have the authority to stop the project. But each time, she ran into the same obstacle. The structure was unconventional, but not illegal. The Johnson children watched with wide-eyed joy as their father's creation transformed their backyard into a wonderland. To them, it wasn't just a treehouse anymore. It was a castle in the sky. They proudly invited their friends over just to watch the progress, whispering excitedly about the adventures they would soon have inside. And as the walls grew taller, so did Karen's desperation. She couldn't bear the sight of it dominating the neighborhood skyline, towering defiantly where she had once claimed victory. She believed she had destroyed the Johnsons' joy forever, but now, in its place, something even greater was rising, a monument to defiance, a direct challenge to her authority. By the time the roof beams were hoisted into place, casting long shadows over the street, Karen's frustration had reached a breaking point. This wasn't just about a treehouse anymore. It was about control, and she was determined not to lose. But what she didn't know was that David's plans went far beyond what she could even imagine. Because the structure he was building wasn't just a replacement. It was about to become something so extravagant, so jaw-dropping, that the entire neighborhood and even the city would take notice. The first beams had risen, but this was only the beginning. The summer sun burned hot over the neighborhood as the oak tree transformed into something few would have believed possible. What had begun as beams and planks had quickly taken the form of a structure so ambitious that whispers spread from one end of the street to the other. It was no longer a treehouse. It was becoming something far greater, a mansion among the branches. By midsummer, the skeleton of the build was complete. Too few L-levels stood proudly above the yard, wrapped around the trunk like a fortress carved from the tree itself. But David wasn't stopping there. He added a third level, crowned with a pitched roof, its shingles gleaming beneath the sunlight. From a distance, it looked less like a backyard project and more like a woodland lodge. Windows with white frames were installed, glass panes reflecting the sky. A wide balcony curved around one side, complete with a railing strong enough to support gatherings. French doors opened outward onto that balcony, suggesting that the space inside was far more than a simple playroom. Soon, details began to emerge that turned curiosity into awe. An outdoor spiral staircase connected each level, handrails polished smooth, steps built from oak to match the tree itself. Solar panels lined the roof, angled perfectly to capture the afternoon sun, while a rainwater collection system fed into a concealed tank. These weren't the touches of an amateur builder. They were the choices of someone intent on permanence. Inside, the rooms took shape. Drywall went up, flooring was laid, and wiring snaked through the walls. Lights flickered on in the evenings, glowing like fireflies from within the branches. Neighbors craned their necks at night just to catch glimpses of the lit-up interior, wondering how such a thing could exist in their quiet suburban enclave. The Johnson children were ecstatic. To them, this wasn't just a playhouse anymore. It was a castle, a fortress, a dream made real. Their father had given them something better than they ever could have imagined. But to Karen, it was a nightmare. From the moment the structure began resembling a true home, her frustration hardened into obsession. She couldn't walk past without grinding her teeth. She couldn't open her blinds without the sight of it looming in her periphery. It felt like it was mocking her, rising defiantly into the sky as if daring her to try again. She had already called inspectors, filed complaints, and even attempted to rally other neighbors to her side. Some listened sympathetically, but most shrugged. After all, the mansion wasn't hurting anyone. It wasn't blocking sunlight. It wasn't spilling into another property. If anything, it was impressive. Karen, however, saw only violation. To her, it was proof that the Johnsons were mocking the rules, mocking the HOA, mocking her. And that was something she couldn't tolerate. Her walks became patrols. She circled the Johnson house daily, pausing to take new photos. She filed weekly reports to the HOA, demanding that they intervene. She even called the city zoning office again, insisting that a full-sized house was being built illegally in a backyard tree. But time and time again, her complaints were dismissed. David had done his homework too well. Every inch of the build fit neatly within legal loopholes. The HOA couldn't touch it, and city officials found no violations that warranted action. Meanwhile, the mansion grew even more extravagant. By late August, a rope bridge connected the main structure to a smaller platform in a neighboring tree, an observation deck overlooking the street. Flower boxes hung from the balcony, spilling with bright blooms. And to the children's delight, David installed a slide that spiraled down from the second level, ending in a soft bed of mulch. It wasn't just a treehouse anymore. It was a paradise. Neighbors who once frowned in suspicion began to marvel at it. Kids begged to come over. Parents stopped on their evening walks to compliment David's work. The mansion had become the talk of the town, admired by many as a feat of creativity and determination. Some even suggested it increased the neighborhood's charm. But Karen saw none of that. All she saw was a growing monument to her failure. By now, she had started keeping a log. Every day she recorded the progress, time-stamped photos, and notes about potential violations. She convinced herself that if she could collect enough evidence, she'd eventually find something that would stick. She lost sleep over it, lying awake at night with the glow of the treehouse lights seeping through her curtains. The breaking point came one evening when David unveiled the final touch of that summer, an outdoor elevator. Using a pulley system and a motor, he built a small platform that could carry groceries, supplies, or even a person up to the second level. His children rode it with shrieks of joy, waving from the air as if they were kings of the neighborhood. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk that night, phone trembling in her hand as she filmed. Her face burned red with rage. To her, this was proof that the mansion wasn't just for children. It was becoming a functioning home. And if it was a home, then surely it was breaking some kind of law. But still, her calls went unanswered. And so, as the tree mansion stood tall in the Johnson backyard, glowing warmly against the night sky, the neighborhood watched in awe while Karen seethed. Her obsession had consumed her, and yet she had nothing to show for it. The mansion wasn't finished yet. In fact, David was only getting started, because while Karen plotted her next move, he was already designing expansions that would push the project into a realm no one could have imagined. By the time autumn leaves began to fall, the Johnson treehouse was no longer whispered about as a curiosity. It had become a legend. The neighborhood, once content with manicured lawns and uniform homes, now had something that felt larger than life rising above it all. David's tree mansion stood proudly against the skyline, its 3 stories nestled within the oak's sprawling branches, its balconies jutting out like watchtowers. But instead of slowing down, David pressed further. With the foundation strong and the structure secure, he began adding luxuries that transformed it from an impressive backyard project into something unimaginable. The first addition was plumbing. Neighbors blinked in disbelief as a professional truck pulled up to the Johnson driveway, unloading pipes, fittings, and tools. Within weeks, a functioning sink and bathroom had been installed inside the mansion. Rainwater collected from the rooftop flowed into a filtration system, providing running water that trickled neatly through the taps. What had once been a playhouse now had its own water supply. Then came electricity. The solar panels already powered lights, but David expanded the system, wiring outlets, charging stations, and even a small refrigerator. At night, the glow of string lights wound around the balconies, illuminating the oak like a beacon. From the street, it looked like a festive lodge, warm, inviting, alive. The children marveled at every new feature. They spent afternoons sprawled on the loft floor, playing games under the hum of ceiling fans. Their friends begged for sleepovers, and parents couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. What had begun as a symbol of loss was now a dream come true. But for Karen, each new addition was like salt in a wound. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. A functioning bathroom? Electrical wiring? A refrigerator? To her, this wasn't a treehouse. It was an illegal second home. She pounded at the HOA president's door, demanding action, waving photos in his face like evidence in a courtroom. But again, she met resistance. The bylaws had no provisions for what David had built. It wasn't a shed. It wasn't a garage. It wasn't freestanding. It lived in the gray area of rules, where creativity met loopholes. Unless the city declared it unsafe, there was nothing the HOA could do. Karen's obsession deepened. Her walks turned into stakeouts. She sat in her car at night, windows cracked, recording hours of footage. She muttered about safety hazards, about decreasing property values, about the neighborhood being ruined. But the more she fought, the more the mansion seemed to thrive. David, meanwhile, added flourishes that pushed the project into the extraordinary. A fire pit was installed on the ground level, surrounded by benches, turning the backyard into a gathering place. A rope bridge connected the mansion to another tree, this one supporting a smaller guest house platform with hammocks. Even a projector was mounted, transforming a blank wall into an outdoor movie screen. By October, the Johnsons hosted a neighborhood gathering. Music played from speakers powered by the solar panels. Children ran up and down the spiral staircase. Adults stood in awe, sipping drinks on the balcony while laughing at the absurdity of it all. For the first time, the neighborhood didn't just admire the mansion. They celebrated it. Everyone except Karen. She stayed inside her home, blinds drawn, seething as laughter drifted through her walls. To her, the tree mansion was no longer just a nuisance. It was a personal humiliation. She had tried to destroy the Johnson family's joy, and instead, she had fueled something bigger than anyone could control. The breaking point came when local attention found its way to the neighborhood. Photos of the tree mansion, shared casually on social media, went viral. Posts racked up thousands of likes, comments pouring in from strangers marveling at the creativity. "The ultimate treehouse," one caption read. "Better than my first apartment," another joked. Within weeks, a local news crew arrived. They filmed the mansion, interviewed David, and showcased the creation on the evening broadcast. Reporters framed it as a story of resilience, a father who had turned a forced demolition into a masterpiece for his children. The coverage painted the Johnsons as heroes of imagination, defying rigid rules to create joy. The neighborhood buzzed with pride. They weren't just residents anymore. They lived on the block with the tree mansion. Strangers drove by slowly, phones out, snapping pictures. Kids pointed, excitedly, from car windows. But Karen's humiliation grew unbearable. What she saw as an eyesore was now celebrated by the city, praised by strangers, and immortalized online. Her attempts to destroy it had backfired so spectacularly that she had become invisible in her own crusade. Nobody was listening to her anymore. And so, late at night, while the mansion glowed like a lantern in the dark, Karen sat at her kitchen table surrounded by folders of printed complaints, photos, and reports. She whispered to herself that there had to be a way to bring it down. She swore she wouldn't stop, not until the oak tree stood bare again. But David was already thinking bigger. He knew the mansion had captured attention far beyond his street, and with that came possibilities. What if it wasn't just a private project? What if it became something more, something the entire community could share? The oak tree had once carried the weight of childhood laughter. Now it carried something greater, a dream too large to ignore. And Karen, blinded by her obsession, was about to make her most desperate move yet. The tree mansion had gone from a neighborhood curiosity to a citywide sensation. Cars slowed on the street to catch glimpses of it. Local magazines published features praising its ingenuity. Online forums debated its legality while marveling at its design. To many, it was a story of triumph over pettiness, a celebration of creativity and family. But to Karen, it was an unbearable humiliation. Each passing day was a reminder that she had lost. The sound of children laughing from the balconies pierced her like nails on a chalkboard. The glow of lights at night mocked her as she pulled her curtains tight. And every smiling neighbor, every car parked nearby for a photo, felt like an insult. Karen's obsession, once fueled by frustration, now boiled into desperation. She began keeping detailed logs, pages of notes about noise levels, construction activity, even the number of guests who visited the Johnsons' backyard. She printed screenshots of online posts, convinced they could be used as evidence of illegal business activity. She stalked city ordinances late into the night, searching for wording that could shut the project down. But no matter how hard she tried, she hit walls at every turn. The HOA remained powerless. City inspectors shrugged. Neighbors no longer listened. Her voice, once loud and commanding, had been reduced to little more than background noise. That was when Karen decided she couldn't rely on others anymore. Her first attempt at sabotage was subtle. She called the fire department, reporting that the tree mansion posed a fire hazard. Trucks arrived, sirens wailing, and for a moment she felt the rush of victory. But the firefighters, after inspecting the structure, left with nothing more than a nod of approval. David had installed fire extinguishers and smoke detectors. The tree mansion was safer than many homes. Undeterred, Karen escalated. She wrote letters to the mayor's office, claiming the structure was a danger to children and a public nuisance. She drove downtown to hand-deliver them, convinced that if she made enough noise, someone would act. But weeks passed without response. Her fury turned darker. She began muttering about accidents, about how one wrong cut could topple the beams, about how a single storm might bring it all crashing down. She walked the sidewalks at night, pausing beneath the glowing mansion, staring up at it with clenched fists as if trying to will it to fall. Meanwhile, David continued his expansions. By late autumn, the mansion had grown even grander. He installed a small wood-burning stove for warmth, complete with a safe chimney system. A library nook appeared, its shelves lined with books and board games. Hammocks swayed between the beams of the guest deck, and, to the delight of the children, a hot tub was lifted into place on the balcony, a bubbling oasis above the ground, the man's. Ion wasn't just functional anymore. It was luxurious. Neighbors, once skeptical, now openly admired it. Some even pitched in, helping to decorate the exterior with seasonal lights. The Johnson backyard became the unofficial gathering place for block parties, bonfires, and movie nights. The mansion had grown beyond a family project. It had become a community landmark. But Karen couldn't stand it. Each improvement deepened her rage. Each laugh that drifted into her yard felt like a dagger. She believed the neighborhood had turned against her, siding with her enemies, mocking her loss. Her breaking point came one cold evening when she overheard two neighbors praising the mansion, calling it the heart of the neighborhood. To Karen, those words confirmed her greatest fear, that her influence, once ironclad, was gone forever. That night, she hatched a plan. If no authority would take her side, if no rule could bring the mansion down, then she would take matters into her own hands. She gathered tools in secret, muttering under her breath as she rehearsed her justifications. To her, it wasn't sabotage, it was restoring order. She convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood from chaos, from falling standards, from decline. Her plan was simple: weaken the supports under cover of night, making the structure unsafe. One small act, she told herself, and the weight of the mansion would do the rest. But Karen underestimated two things: David's thoroughness and the watchful eyes of the neighborhood. The night she crept into the Johnson yard, flashlight in hand, she didn't realize a neighbor across the street had seen her. Nor did she know that David, anticipating trouble, had installed motion sensor cameras around the oak tree. Her every move was caught on film. The next morning, the footage spread like wildfire. Neighbors watched in disbelief as Karen, once the self-proclaimed guardian of the HOA rules, was revealed sneaking through a yard with tools in hand. Her reputation, already fragile, shattered completely. The HOA, embarrassed by her actions, stripped her of any remaining influence. Police issued a stern warning, and though no charges were filed, her credibility was gone. She had become what she hated most, the neighborhood problem. And through it all, the Tree Mansion stood strong. Karen, humiliated and isolated, withdrew behind her curtains. The Johnsons, meanwhile, celebrated not just their mansion, but their victory over relentless pettiness. The oak tree, once stripped bare, now held something greater than anyone could have imagined, a symbol of resilience, creativity, and joy. Yet the story wasn't finished. Because while Karen faded from sight, the Tree Mansion's fame was only growing, and soon the Johnsons would face a new challenge: not fighting a neighbor, but managing the attention of the world beyond their street. Winter arrived, and with it came a quiet transformation of the neighborhood. Snow dusted the rooftops, lawns turned white, and the oak tree at the center of it all stood like a beacon. The Tree Mansion, now fully realized, glowed warmly against the frosty nights. Its lights twinkled through the branches, stringed garlands shimmered, and smoke curled gently from its tiny chimney. What had once been a backyard secret was now impossible to ignore. The story had gone viral months before, but now it was something bigger. National outlets picked it up. Photos of the mansion circulated on travel blogs and architecture forums. Some called it the ultimate backyard getaway, while others marveled at how a family had turned pettiness into innovation. The Johnsons began receiving emails from journalists, YouTubers, and even television producers. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. At first, it was flattering. Strangers praised David's creativity, parents wrote messages about how inspired they were, and offers rolled in from brands eager to sponsor the next stage of the mansion's growth. But with the attention came crowds. Cars parked on the street daily, sometimes in double lines, just so people could snap photos. Families from other neighborhoods wandered the sidewalks, hoping to catch a glimpse. The Johnsons' backyard, once private, had become a tourist attraction. The children loved the excitement. They waved from the balconies, giggling at the strangers who pointed up in awe. But David and his wife began to feel the strain. What had been built as a gift for their kids was slowly turning into a spectacle. Privacy dwindled, and with each passing week it became harder to ignore the reality that their home was no longer just theirs. Karen, meanwhile, retreated deeper into isolation. The video of her attempted sabotage had spread just as quickly as the mansion's fame, turning her into the villain of the story. Neighbors avoided her. Strangers online mocked her. She closed her blinds, rarely stepped outside, and when she did, it was only under the cover of night. Her once constant presence on the sidewalks had vanished. She had become a ghost of her former self, consumed not by triumph, but by defeat. Yet even in her silence, Karen watched. From her window, she saw the mansion thrive, saw the neighborhood embrace it, saw the world celebrate it. And though she no longer fought openly, the bitterness remained. To her, the oak tree would always be a monument to her failure. Back at the Johnson home, David faced a decision. Offers continued to pour in. Reality shows proposing to feature the tree mansion, companies asking to use it for advertising, and even local officials suggesting it could become a landmark. But each proposal pulled the mansion further away from what it was meant to be. It had started as a gift to his children, a way to restore what had been taken. It was meant to be a place of laughter, of imagination, of family. Now it risked becoming a business. Yes, a brand, a spectacle. On a cold December evening, David gathered his family in the mansion. Snowflakes drifted past the windows, the stove crackled warmly, and the children curled in blankets on the loft. He looked around at the walls he had built, the beams that held them steady, the glow that filled the space, and he made his choice. The Johnsons would keep the mansion private. No sponsorships, no shows, no advertisements. It would remain what it had always been, a place for family, for friends, for joy, a fortress of imagination in the branches of an old oak tree. In time, the crowds dwindled. The world moved on to other stories, other marvels. The street quieted again, returning to its familiar rhythm. The mansion remained, standing proud, but it was no longer a tourist stop. It was once again just a home. And as the seasons passed, it became more than a structure. It became a legacy. The Johnson children grew, carrying with them memories of a childhood spent in a mansion among the trees. Neighbors remembered the story as a lesson in resilience, that sometimes rules can be challenged, and sometimes defiance can create beauty. Karen never recovered her old influence. She lived out her days in the shadow of the oak, watching silently as life moved forward without her. To the end, she saw the tree mansion as a scar, a reminder of the battle she lost. But to everyone else, it was something else entirely. It was a triumph, a monument not of rebellion, but of perseverance. Proof that joy can rise from loss, that creativity can bloom from spite, and that sometimes the best way to fight back is not with anger, but with imagination. And so, the oak tree stood tall, its branches forever cradling the mansion in the sky. A place born from conflict, grown through determination, and remembered as the wonder that no rule, no complaint, and no Karen could ever bring down.